Please, it's a huge honor and privilege to welcome not just my friend, my student, but my Uman buddy. We spent time in Uman together. Hashem had it that of all the places, of all the inns we were going to meet in the world, Hashem put us in the same hotel in Uman this Rosh Hashanah. So we got to really bond even more and have the first conversation we had as soon as we got to Uman was super intense. And without further ado, we can do like clapping and big it up for my man, Yaackov Lehman in the house. Yaackov, over to you, man.
Howdy, y'all. I'd tell you all if we were on Clubhouse to do the microphone pump, but I think the microphone settings are set against that, and we're on Zoom. What's up, everybody? My name is Yaackov Lehman. I'm here in Israel. I'm in a small village on a hilltop about 20 minutes outside Jerusalem called Beit Meir. Been here 9 years. Pretty good. I got married 9 years ago this week. This Parsha, we have to look it up, Rabbi Hill, what Parsha it was. It's a big Parsha for me. And Rabbi Hill said, you know, I'm a Yaackov. I feel so connected to that. I think it's going to be relevant to our topic, which is Jewish mindfulness. Certainly will be relevant. But, you know, when I met Rabbi Hill, I was a Jake. I hated the name. Actually, I was born Jacob, but age 5, it was too Jewish for me, so I changed it to Jake. I never met an Orthodox Jew until I was 19. So I'm coming away from, as they say, I don't know if they have this in the cricket pitch, but left field. Does such a thing exist in cricket? Oh. I don't know, baseball fans out here, you get the analogy, but Tucson, Arizona, never meeting an Orthodox Jew. I'd been to China, to India, to Cambodia, to Morocco, some other 40 countries before I ever touched down in Israel or knew one word of Hebrew, despite my Reform MTV themed bar mitzvah, go Tucson bar mitzvah 90s style. So yeah, my journey to Judaism was certainly circuitous, and to end up as a Yaackov, as I said, Jacob was too Jewish for me. So I was Jake with the dreads from California, just through a music festival 3 months before I met Rabbi Hill. And as Rabbi Hill humbly said, he had a part, but it was a massive part at Rabbi Hill's table and his wisdom. I was able to grow and make a decision to pivot my life to Israel. And I've been here for 13 years after I met you, Rabbi Hill, 15 years ago. So that's just a bit of the context I'm coming in. I've spent the last 15 years learning Torah. I still do practice Qigong and Tai Chi. I teach meditation, which Rabbi Hill mentioned, and maybe we'll get into a little bit. I've been interested in the translation, transmission, transmigration of contemplative wisdom into the workplace. I think now is a time where ancient wisdom is all the more important and relevant in the world, not just Jewish wisdom, but contemplative traditions from the East or shamanic rituals. We're in an era where there's definitely a need and a return to very primal modes of connection and connecting to oneself. There's a lot to say on this, but I just want to let you know as we dive in that I'm very deeply steeped in the wisdom of the Torah as long as I've been able to, and as much as I'm able to. I learn every day. I love the Torah. It ignites my life. And I use it as my primary framework to access other wisdoms of the world, which is before I knew the Torah and in the academic world or in different traditions. So I'm coming at you from a perspective of authentic Torah wisdom that I hope to bring you right from the sources, but as well as that in dialogue and in context with a wider understanding of mindfulness and contemplative wisdom, particularly in its relevance and applicability in the 58th century. Because it is the year 5782, ladies and gentlemen. There's no reason we need to limit ourselves to just the 21st century. Abraham lived in the 21st century, so we're way past that. We're way futuristic here in the 58th, and there's a lot of change, which is relevant to why we're talking about mindfulness now, and we weren't 5 years ago. So with that brief preface, let's talk about mindfulness and Jewish mindfulness. So there's a problem here. And there's an intrinsic problem of translation. Anytime that we're going to try to build a parallel structure, we're going to inevitably run into linguistic and cultural problems. So the word mindfulness, it's a pretty cool English word. The Hebrew translation in modern Hebrew is muda'ut. It actually is like a few different terms. We don't really know what to call this modern incarnation of mindfulness. Maybe I'll define it as we know from the mindfulness space. Very interesting to note that mindfulness in America was in large part, and in an overwhelmingly large part, spearheaded by Jews. In the 1970s, John Kabat-Zinn founded the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. He was a PhD out of UMass, I believe, or did his research out of UMass. And his idea was, he was raised Jewish in New York, so he had a thirst and a quench, but his whatever Reformed Jewish upbringing didn't give him the nourishment, nor me, that he was seeking. So he got into Zen Buddhism, and his project was to take the teachings of Zen and bring them into a clinical setting. So he was the first one to put fMRI, as that technology grew, to start understanding in the brain what's happening when people enter a contemplative state. And John Kabat-Zinn, and that was one school in the 70s. The other school was the Insight Meditation Society, founded by Sharon Salzberg, Joseph Goldstein, and and I'm forgetting the third name. Oh, Jack Kornfield. That's right. So another three Jews. These were the two primary mindfulness schools in the United States, 1970s. And this whole project of mindfulness was to try to take the universal elements out of traditional practices that had been in Tibet or in Japan or in the Upanishads and throughout India, and bring them into a modern context. And this was not interesting to people for 30 years. If you look at the academic journal articles that are written in mindfulness, it's like 1, 2, 3, 3, 2 for like 30 years. And then in 2005, it just takes off and picks up. So now I'm sure you guys have heard of this topic. You're showing up to learn, but I just painting this historiography to understand that it's come a long way. And when we talk about this term, and especially try to translate it into what it means in our indigenous wisdom, the life flowing fountain of the Torah that's 4,000 years being providing, the cutting edge, groundbreaking ideas for human civilization, we're going to have to understand what we're dealing with the English word, and we're going to have to understand where the corollaries are in our understanding of the soul, of the world, of the mind, etc. So this, again, a little background about mindfulness. Insight Meditation Society, John Kabat-Zinn, MBSR, Jews in the 70s, trying to develop an objective look at what happens in the mind. Now, one of the modes for this study is Contemplative Sciences. Contemplative Sciences broadly refers to practices that you enter into different states of consciousness, contemplative states of consciousness. So in this regards, mindfulness is a contemplative practice. Sitting meditation is a contemplative practice, but so is prayer. Now, it says in the Talmud that when we used to really pray, and the times of the temple, and right after the temple were the great sages of the Mishnah and of the Gemara, the Amoraim and the Tanaim. And it says that they used to spend an hour in preparation for prayer, an hour in prayer, and an hour coming down for prayer. So when we talk about prayer, which in Hebrew is called tefillah, prayer, or service of the heart, right? We're going to talk a lot about the heart and mindfulness versus heartfulness, right? This is another paradigm and framework, especially when we overlay the Jewish motifs to understand what we're talking about here. But they took 3 hours, 3 times a day, to enter into a contemplative state of consciousness. And in that state, as you know, in the modern era, we can see your brainwaves are actually changing. You're entering into scientifically measurable states of consciousness where your mode of thinking, your mode of awareness is different. And, throughout the Torah, we've had these techniques even before prayer. In the times of the temple, in the times of the first and second temple, there were prophets. So when we think about mindfulness and its relation to contemplative wisdom, in our corpus of wisdom, we have people that were walking the earth, that were in a cosmic state of conscious awareness. So they weren't just mindful, being in the present, being able to, not check their Twitter feed these people were mindful, but in a state very much beyond. The Jewish map of the world paints the fact that we are the lowest of 4 worlds, and there's really a 5th hidden one, which is also related to the 4 letters of God's name. So if there's a Yud, a Hey, a Vav, and a Hey, we're at the very, very bottom of the very, very bottom of the very, very bottom fractal iteration of that last letter Hey. But a prophet who is awakening his inner eyes, inner vision, and a prophet is called somebody who achoses, somebody who sees. There's a notion of a third inner eye in Judaism. There's an inner seeing that they're able to ascend to, they're able to transcend even the reality that's governed by Newtonian and quantum laws of physics that we experience every day, and enter into different dimensions, which aren't just some astral extraterrestrial pondering. This is actually the part of the Jewish tradition of understanding these four worlds, what the mechanisms, who the different agents are at each of the levels. We have a map, and these are the prophets that ascended that. So again, I'm starting out just posing some challenges of translation. We talk about mindfulness. John Kabat-Zinn says this is being in the present a moment, aware, and even with a non-judgmental disposition to the world, or great gratitude is another part of mindfulness. So in a simple sense, mindfulness in America, its root is non-judgmental awareness in the moment. I experience something. I'm driving in the car. I'm trying to be mindful. I'm cut off. There's a lot of emotion raging. There's even fingers raising and raging. But now I'm in the moment. I try to just experience this as an experience, not as a story, not that jerk, or this always happens to me, or I can't believe New Yorkers, or there's all stories we can have to get angry and upset at this thing. But a non-judgmental awareness would say, oh, this is a phenomenon that I've become aware of. How do I know it? I saw it with my eyes. I heard it with my ears. These are just data inputs. And me, I am an autonomous being. I can choose which of these inputs that I want to give attention to, or which of these emotions. Oh, I'm feeling anger and upsetness. I'm late. I was cut off. I don't deserve this. I had a bad day. My boss, my wife, a mindful person is aware of the data input and is able to manage that story to the direction they want. And if you're a healthy person, you say, oh, that happened, moving on. So that is a judgmental, dispassionate awareness. So that is mindfulness. But as I'm alluding at, our Jewish contemplative wisdom, again, contemplative and mindfulness sharing a very similar role in the present discourse, is much more than that. And I think that's where I want to dive in and depart to just a few models of understanding mindfulness from a Jewish perspective. So I guess the first thing we have to understand is mind. What does it mean to be full of mind? What does that even mean in English, right? As opposed to mindlessness, mindfulness. So to understand this, we have to first explore the 5 different levels of the soul that we're taught that the humans are created with. We believe the architecture of the soul to be consisting of these 5. Again, we're going to see patterns of 4 and 5. It's really 4 with a hidden 5th. God's name being this eternal iterating equation that is illuminating everything in the world. Everything is broken down into these patterns. So the sages teach that these 5 levels, we actually are only living with 2 of them permanently. Let me explain. The lowest level of the soul is called the Nephesh. So the Nephesh is the body, the physical animated part of the soul that we share in with animals. Animals have a Nephesh, right? Everybody has a Nephesh. A Nephesh goes after Maslow's hierarchy of food and shelter, the base needs, the Nephesh achionit, the vivifying soul that is needed to connect something of ethereal, godly origin into a coarse world governed by eating, drinking, food, shelter, blood vessels, oxygen exchange, and the like. So we need a Nephesh that we have with us, and we need to take care of our Nephesh. The second level is called a Ruach. Now, if people know the word Ruach, if people know Hebrew, the word Ruach refers to, or can mean wind. And it's also the second level of the soul, and it has this wind-like connotation. It's more of an emotional state. It's a state of awareness, but it's basically our day-to-day state of consciousness. The Nephesh is a level that we share with animals, an animating soul. The Ruach is basically stream of consciousness. Okay, and we live with these 2. Now, I didn't even mention the main word. If people have learned a little bit, people know for soul, people translate as neshama. So again, a problem with translation. Great word for soul. We can say colloquially, what a neshama. Or if you're Hebrew or Israeli, is a neshama, why. We certainly don't have a why translation in English yet, particularly not the Queen's English. That'll be the day. Why. But the neshama is not even in our body, guys. We are not even being this. It's a level of soul that we actually can experience, we can touch, but we're not often in touch with it. The Maharal of Prague, who was the great sage known for his creation of the golem in the 1600s in Prague, he says something interesting. He says, "Kishehaguf midaberet haneshama shoteket," which means when the body is speaking, when the lower level body and nephesh and animal desires and thoughts and anxieties and lusts and fears and angers, when all of that is happening in our mind, neshama shoteket, the soul, the neshama level of the soul is quiet. And he explained that just like this cup, which is filled with a delicious elixir combination of soda water and pomegranate juice, it is absolutely delicious. If this cup is filled with dirty gutter sewer water, all right, and I'm trying to squeeze the delicious pomegranate elixir with the soda water bush as well coming in there from Eretz Israel, flowing soda water flows out of the rocks, guys. I'm telling you, just come check it out. You'll see it. And I'm trying to fill this delicious, beautiful stream of nectar elixir, and this thing is filled with sewage water. Every time it's like, hey, Yaackov, I want to give you some nice pomegranate juice. I want to come in, and it just hits this level of like leaf and mud and sludge and whatever's in there. I can't get in. And this is how we live our lives. But when we can slowly reduce a little bit of that clogged, heavy, not like viscous fluid of the mind, that's all of the noise, the static. You know, one of the greatest things I learned from the Google Search Inside Yourself mindfulness training program, they have this slide at the beginning of their presentation where they have a snow globe just shaken up, and inside the snow globe is like all the icons of like email, WhatsApp, like Twitter, like Facebook, you know, all the call, all these things are happening in the mind. And then, you know, just with a little bit of silence, a little bit of time, things settle and you can see clear. And it's similar to that with how to clear out this gutter water of just everyday life. It's traumatic. We're built with something in neuroscience called the croc brain, the amygdala, right? The amygdala, you know, biologically speaking, is this very, very old piece of the brain that responds to fight or flight. So you know, we're like wired to like, you know, this is the nephesh, right? This is the same thing we share in animals. Something comes, we're programmed. Do we fight it? Do we run? It's very primal. And when we encounter things on the road, in the workplace, at home, online, the same mechanisms are triggered of deep threats, like to our life. So we're reacting in very heavy nephesh ways, in very animal primal ways. If we can gain control of that, as the Maharal says, if we can, when that is all talking with static, the neshama is quiet. If we can empty ourselves a bit of that, you know, clogged, animalistic, static noise of the soul, of the nefesh and the ruach, then we allow the neshama to come in, and the neshama will enter a person. It won't enter them completely. It goes in, it goes out. And according to somebody's vessel, if you're coming to the great waterfall of pomegranate juice and soda water, and you've only got a tiny Turkish coffee cup, you know, you can fill up so much from that. You go to the, you know, a bigger jug, and that's what growth is. There's this light always pouring in from the soul. The thing about the soul's light is it's huge. It's an unending waterfall. It's not that our souls need to grow, that we need to grow spiritually. Our spiritual growth is already there. It's only the level of our awareness and our opening up of that vessel which expands back. The light is always there, but the vessel is what expands, and that's how we experience growth from bottom to below. So nefesh, so neshama is this level of the soul. And what does that mean? That means in the times of your life or of my life, I can just tell you where I've had serious what I don't want to call them interventions, but axial points of my life, peak experiences where I've been in a moment where I've made a free will decision, where I felt there's really a fork in a road and I can be that train engineer pulling the lever and literally the train is diverted and it ends up thousands of miles apart from where it could have been. So that's a neshama experience. If people have had powerful experiences in prayer on high holidays or at concerts, or hikes, or there's many ways that people can attain a peak experience, which a relative level of soul is coming in. But know that those are peak experiences and they're not accessible every day. But there are practices, we'll talk about those later, how we can reduce a bit of that static in the nephesh and in the ruach in order to let in more of that holiness, the soul. And Shabbat, just as a spoiler alert, Shabbat is like at the top of the list. That's the day where we get a neshama yisera, double level of soul. It's the day that we're not human doings defined by our business card and our email signature, that we're just human beings that can mindfully in the present, not plan, not have money exchanged, not create anything. We just can experience being present. So there's no reason for any of that day-to-day, we call that in Hebrew shotef, like the flow of like day-to-day tasks and activities that occupy and generate all the static. Shabbat is the time we can really let go of that. Just know that we're in with the people, with the food, with the preparations, with the mindset that we come into Friday night. We can just keep that and go deeper the whole time. And again, be a human being instead of being defined by the doing, which is the generating all that static. So that's the spoiler alert, but I still want to paint the rest of the soul architecture here for you guys. That's only in the neshama. We're only at the third or the fifth level of soul. The fourth level, which is the yud of God's name. So if you're keeping track, the nephesh was the last hay. The vav is the ruach. So those are the two we're living with all the time. That's our stream of consciousness. The neshama is what comes in at special times and occasions where we feel extra empowered in our free will agency and have made big moves or had deep insights. That's a soul neshama experience. A soul neshama experience can be had by reducing the static and noise in the lower levels of the soul to let in and expand out the capacity to receive the soul, which is a makif, meaning a hovering light that is imagine a massive just field of complete luminescence, like it's there above us in a non-physical way. And our work is to just expand our cognitive, emotional, spiritual capacity vessels to let more of that in. Then there's the chaya. The neshama was the hay, the first hay of Hashem's name, and the chaya is the yud. The chaya corresponds to the geocoordinate of chachma, wisdom, again, a bad translation in the spherotic breakdown. And this is a part of soul that we may never experience. Some people may go their whole lives never getting up to that level of chaya. Others may, and tzaddikim, the righteous, and if you're ever blessed to be around somebody who's righteous, they're operating at that level of consciousness, which is a very, very high state of unity. Chachma is something that is a certain level of unified awareness and consciousness that precedes the bifurcation and split into multiplicity. That's a mouthful, but let me try to explain what I'm saying. That even in the neshama level, you're seeing a very high level of awareness, a high level of self-revelation and self-agency and empowerment. But it's coming, you're seeing the details, you're seeing people, you're seeing things, you're seeing thoughts, you have your soul. When you get into a state of chachma or of the chaya, it'd be like just the same way the entire space matter of planet Earth and Mars and the asteroid belt and all the galaxies and galaxy clusters and the entire Earth, according to scientists, came from a tiny little pupil-sized Big Bang unity, and everything was bound up in time and space in that point of singularity, according to the scientists, which, by the way, parenthetical, was a tremendous chidush, novelty. Before the 1950s, if you were to say that there was an origin of life from one point, they would say you're a religious fanatic. That's not the way the universe works. It's eternal, it's internally collapsing. And for physicists to come and say that there was a point of origin was a very religious story and caught a lot of people off guard. Check the historiography out of the Big Bang and how revolutionary it was, just the notion of a beginning. But I'm using this analogy to show how everything could be unified, meaning a waterfall in Costa Rica and a rice farmer in Burma and Alpha Centauri 29, all throughout time, throughout thousands of years and millions of years, whatever you want to track, it was all in that tiny unified point. So too, when a tzaddik, when a righteous person ascends up to a level of chaya, that's a soul where you see the entire matter and time and soul distribution throughout the world as coming from one unified source, which is the emanation of God's will. What can we say about that level? Words don't go there. Words are like, if you're trying to climb there, the ladder stops here and you have to figure out another way to get all those stores out. You have to use something else other than a ladder. And right now on Zoom at 9:30 at 9 Israel, all we've got are words. So that's all I can say about the chaya. But the yechida, the fifth, which is the hidden part of the yud, right, is already, the Hebrew letter, it's not even touching the bottom of the paper. It's already up in the clouds. But there's a tiny little dot at the top of the yud. And if you went into like super cosmic fractalized dive in, double click, you would see that like the point of the yud contains the entire genetic code of the entire system is painted out there. And that is relevant to this part of, or relating to this part of the soul called the yechida, which is the intrinsic, non-negotiable connection to God himself of every single person in a completely equitably distributed way. There is no distinction, there's no differential. It's a complete unified connection to the entire system through God himself's will. And that is the top of our soul. If we were to climb up to that, all of us little tiny micro blood cells and micro organelles and organisms, within the big structure, we would see that there's a meta structure of a soul called the yechida, where we are all completely receiving the will of the divine creator to be right now, which is why we should be here now and be mindful, because we've got a very deeply underlying divine will for us to be here right now. Everyone, the fact that you're aware, Rene Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. I think I'm aware, therefore God wants me to be, is what we would say in Judaism. The second we become aware that we're here, then we know that there's a part of our soul that's being directly pumped in with the most high, compassionate, desireful, excited will. As much as we can say these things about a creator who wants goodness and is expressing his goodness through us being here in the world through that connection. So those are high levels of soul that we can't speak too much about, the chaya and the yechida, the top two levels way above us. But maybe just summing up here, the word neshama, great word. Hey neshama la, why is in neshama? It only goes so far, because when we're talking about humans who have souls, we're walking around at a much lower level. We're not at the neshama level. We're at the nephesh level, or the ruach level. Now, ruach can be, music is ruach. When the music's wind plays, it's emotion, it's fluid. But not every emotional experience is a neshama experience. I want to also say that. So I believe you can have at a concert. You guys are into EDM. You go and have a blissful experience, like out there in the field. Like that could very well be a neshama experience. I've had those myself. I love music. By the way, prophets, they summoned musicians when they wanted to get into states of consciousness. They said, hey, bring me some musicians. And some musicians would sit and play, and the prophets they had a whole school of prophecy, how to learn to enter these states of consciousness. We've lost a lot of that technique, and a lot of it was only relevant to that time period in history. But they would use music. But we may experience music, and it may be a lower visceral level that's coming from lust and like really not a clean source, or we may have a musical experience that could be coming from the neshama. I haven't been able to identify it myself. I can be, these are things that you have to learn about, hear about, and then feel inside yourself, and then learn and read the map, and then walk and say, is that peak there? And then look at the map again, say, oh right, I see the high elevation there. Is that how it feels? And you feel the way out. That's how it is to navigate the soul architecture and the cartography of the worlds and of the soul. It's complicated, and there is no one path for everyone. So that's a little bit about the mind. Like when we talk about the mind, right? I sometimes when I'm talking, I ask like students here on Zoom, a little more difficult. Like, everybody point to your mind. Some people point here, but is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about the wetware and the mental hardware that's embedded in our brains, the white matter, gray matter, cerebellum, cortex? Is that the mind? In English, it's not. That's the brain. The mind refers to something more ethereal, something that, in actually the philosophy of consciousness, there's two essential different schools, whether or not the mind is really just a product of the cells and neurons that are being exchanged in the lump of meat that is the brain, and that's just all our thoughts are and feelings and hopes and loves, or the mind is something that comes from a higher place. The Torah clearly takes the position that the mind, as we refer to it in English, is a projection of a higher dimensional. It's a higher dimensional ontology. There's a part of us that exists in a level beyond time and space. That is the soul, right? There's an eternal part of us. Jews believe in reincarnation. So as much as we need to be in the present, we need to also be aware that our souls do have baggage. They come from different soul roots. We have soul brothers and branches and roots and shoots, and the whole spherotic tree is mirrored, in this inverted soul tree that we all come down from. And we're trying to think where I was going with the soul reincarnation for a second. Yeah, maybe we'll just keep the soul reincarnation as an aside here. But back to defining, right? We were trying to define the mind and brain. Judaism believes that the soul is eternal, has come into this world in different reincarnations, and is now being expressed through the vehicle, just like a car, let's just say a regular car, not a Tesla. Tesla drives itself only because of the coding, so it still holds. But say a car has the mechanisms to take you on the highway at 85 miles an hour. It's got the engine, it's got the exhaust, but it needs a person, needs an agent or a programmer, in the case of Waymo or Tesla, to come and give it the directions, the consciousness to go move. And that's how the humans view the brain, that the brain and all of these different parts of our neural brain chemistry are a vehicle for something called a soul, or I guess the translation here is relevant to the mind, so to speak, a higher non-material part of ourselves to come enclose itself. The word in Hebrew is hitlabshut. So if I had a glove, if it was cold in Israel, I would have gloves. If I was in England, I'm sorry, because I lived in England and I remember those things. They were not cool. Coming from Arizona, not such glove people. But it is a cool concept that when you put your hand in a glove and you move the glove is moving, everybody sees the glove, but nobody knows the hand is behind it, right? So the mind comes in, is mitlabesh, into the glove of the brain. And then that's how our bodies work. That's how our psychology works. So the mind is something ethereal. This is all coming to say, what is mindfulness? We have to understand the mind. From the Jewish perspective, if we're going to understand what's really happening inside, we have to know that there's 5 levels of soul that we experience. There's a soul that's coming from the animal level, which is related to food and drink and procreation. There's a ruach that's more of a human, social, musical fluid that also subject to a lot of static, a lot of bad emotion, bad emotional vibrations that can cloud our awareness, our stream of consciousness. And then the Jewish understanding is that there's 3 levels above that. And when we talk about where that soul touches the body, it's in something like a brain, that soul structure comes and encloses itself into the brain, into the neural hardware of the brain and the wetware of our different mental processes. And that is how the soul exists with the body. So mindfulness, according to Judaism, with that great kind of framing of what we understand, we need to know a few things. One, this notion of being in the present is very Jewish, but with qualifications. So again, John Kabat-Zinn defining mindfulness as awareness, non-judgmental awareness in the present moment. So this is a very big thing. You are where your thoughts are. There's a story of the great the great tzaddik, the Kedushas Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. And he lived 200 years ago in the Ukraine. And somebody went to go pray, and they were praying from the Amud, right where at the front of the synagogue. And he was praying with such great, enthusiasm, and everybody was so impressed. And after he prayed, as they finished in the Kedushas Levi, this great tzaddik, went over and said, Shalom Aleichem, welcome. So what do you mean, Rebbe, welcome? What do you mean? He said, welcome. Yeah, I've been here the whole time. No, welcome back. He said, I saw you. You were diving there, but your mind, it was at the trade fair in Leipzig. I don't know, it was at the South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, whatever the translation is. Your mind was the fair in Leipzig. You were shuffling and moving around like this, but I knew where your mind was. Doesn't count. You are where your thoughts are. We know the whole notion of prayer and service of the heart comes from sacrifices. Like this whole notion of sacrifice is a very interesting thing to understand, not for today's subject. But basically your mind, when you would go into this service in the temple, if your mind was in the wrong place, you were not doing that practice. You have to be completely invested in the mitzvah, in the moment. When this person is praying, it doesn't matter what he looks like on the outside. If his mind's out in Leipzig, his prayers are out in Leipzig. Welcome back. Hey, welcome back here, buddy, because you weren't here before. We are where our thoughts are. And the great sage Bob Marley, of course, said, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds, which I think is a beautiful idea. That mental imprisonment is what we can get trapped in when we're not in the present moment. That being connected to the moment means taking everything that we have before us with the exact relationship that we choose to have with it in that moment. So that means when we are, I've got 4 kids and I've got a busy job and I've got other things doing, but when I'm with my kids for those 15 minutes, if I'm imprisoned by an email, by this, I've told myself I'm gonna play with my kids. So when I can't have the inner will, the inner ratzon, the maybe a higher neshama, soul type of spark, to tell myself, let me carve out this time to be completely present. And I say I'm gonna do it. And I'm playing with my kids, and I'm rolling around, we're playing moose fight, we got on the ground moose fight, and we got the flying squirrel, and we're doing all this. And all of a sudden, I'm rolling over, my kid is getting up for the second round of flying squirrel, and I'm scrolling and looking at my phone. Well, that's an interesting experience, which is relevant to the secular notion of mindfulness and the Torah notion. Because of the secular notion of mindfulness, I'm supposed to be in the present moment. I've even told myself I want to be, it's a good cause. And the 15 minutes, and I can't even give myself the 15 minutes because I've got a neural habituated activity that's happened to call me to, as if there's something more exciting happening in my phone than 15 minutes with my kids. And I've already made the decision I want to do the 15 minutes, yet I'm unconsciously doing that. So that would be as John Kabat-Zinn would say, a moment of mindful awareness. We don't judge it, we become aware of it, and we return to the present moment, in this case, moose fight, right? From a Torah perspective, it's interesting to know what's going on there, because we understand that is exactly what the Nephesh and the Ruach, when we're starting to get the static, we have an emotional need. I'm missing out on something. I'm bored. I've got nothing to do. I've got 5 seconds of extra time. Let me fill that. FOMO, fear of missing out. So there's a clouding of my mind from everything that's emanating from ultimately a side of fear or a side of love. The right side being love, left side of fear. So all the traits of lust and of honor and all these like expansive bad traits are coming from a fallen side of fear, the right side, and the worry, the anxiety, the anger is coming from a fallen part of the left side. Anyway, these topics need discussion, but the example is illustrative, because here I am trying to carve out time of mindful presence, and I've been diverted away, not according to my own will, according to the will of lower level operating forces that are part of my soul structure. But if you ask me, and I even told myself in the 15 minutes, I'm gonna not check my phone, and yet I still do it. So what's illustrated for this is that there's competing wills. There's a will of the lower self, and there's a will of the higher self. And this is essentially what we need to bear in mind whenever we're trying to assess our daily lives according to a Jewish mindfulness framework. Where am I operating from? Am I operating from a state of where I want to be when I can at least try? And by the way, the neshama, that level, all these things are relative. You might have a real neshama experience once in your life, but every day you might have a relative neshama experience. Every hour might have its relative neshama experience. So what we really need to ask ourselves is identifying who is the higher self? What do we really want? Which is the part of us that's connected to every person, every piece of matter and time in a unified state is connected to God's will himself for us to be alive, which is the higher self, which is my soul, where I could assess my life priorities and my values from a very top bird's eye level, that once a quarter, retreat, you walk out to the forest, you make your list, who are the people I want to connect with? What am I trying to accomplish in the next 5 months? We're not always there. That walk to the forest to go make that list is a neshama experience. If we're mindful in a moment of traffic hindrance, or a moment of playing with kids or out with our friends at dinner, or whatever we're doing, we're becoming aware of what that particular moment requires of us in our higher will. And we'll be aware of competing wills. We'll be aware of part of us that wants to be lazy and to go to sleep and to turn off and to not call that person back. That's going to be part of our will. And we should acknowledge that. We should give it space because it's part of us. We don't have to be ashamed of that. I think that was really a powerful thing for me, is learning that the Torah is not shame. Like there's a lower soul that's pulling us down to different desires that are hard coded in to be functioning more like a gorilla, or like an anteater, or a colony of ants, or pack of hyenas. That's part of me. I have a part of my soul, but I also have a part of my soul that's ethereal, that's connected to angels. And that's the thing I think Rabbi Hill once taught me. The human is embedded between this very, very, what do you want to call it? Liminal, challenging, difficult space, paradoxical space between angel and animal. That angels have no free will because they just do. They're like a computer program that does the will of its creator in a very holy, lofty way. Animals have no free will because they just do the will of their creator in a very lowly, mechanistic, base way. And here we are in the middle, and we're being pulled by many things at the same time. So I think one of the takeaways is being in the moment is definitely a Torah idea, but we have to calibrate with where that is. It may take a thought. What is my top level, highest level code class? What order? What do I want to be operating from? Fear, scared, running away, part of me, which is real. Let's not sweep it under the rug. It's part of me. It's part of my soul. It's rooted in a holy place. If we understood why the fear is related there, we could probably raise and elevate that fear to a more holy fear or awe of sublime if we unpacked it. But we also have a higher level will that's trying to be more compassionate. We're trying to grow. We're trying to make long-term investments and not maximize short-term pleasure, but long-term gain. Not just in our, that was, a message of Hilton, one of Rabbi Hill's kind backers. It was in, I believe, hedge funds. That level of finance, I think he had a hedge fund. But he said that notion of maturity, being able to be in it for the long term and not short term motives, was one of like what he saw to be the signs of himself maturing and other people maturing as investors. So we have to be aware of that there is a higher self. There's a part of us that is in it for that long term, for the compassion, for the connection, for the love, for the right boundaries. And each moment that calls us, we should do our best to show up with that higher level of self. Now, how do we do that? We've got 10 minutes left. I just want to get practical in the last 10 minutes. Maybe we'll have some time for some questions after I hand it over to Rabbi Hill. But I want to make the case for mindfulness. I hope I've done that, the secular conception of being aware in the present moment is a good thing, but we have to understand what that means by the mind, the Jewish, just summing up 5 levels of the soul, a higher soul, a lower soul. Where are we operating from? And how can we do that? So that brings us to mindfulness practice. So believe it or not, breathing has a great, tremendous source in Torah consciousness. It's not talked about a lot and it's not practiced enough, but you see it so clearly that it reminds us how big of a part of breathing is to bring into our daily practice. So when the Jews were coming out of Egypt, now Egypt in Torah consciousness represents everything that is holding us back. It is Meitzarim, the constricted consciousness, the constrictions of life. And we try to come out of Egypt to an era of expansive consciousness, right? Mina Meitzar, Mina Marzi Karasiya, I called out for you from Meitzar, and you answer me with expansive consciousness, is what King David said. So Mitzrayim, Egypt, and expansion, Harchava, are the inverse of each other. So when the Jews come out and are ready to come out of Egypt, Moses says to the Jews, hey guys, I'm ready to take you out. God told me that it's ready to go. Egypt's going to be destroyed. I'm going to bring you out, take you to the lands of your forefathers. Are you ready to go? And the Jews said, nothing. It says, the verse says, V'lo shamim, it says in Parshas Vayera, lo shamim oto, they didn't hear Moses. They didn't even hear him. It's like if we're in a really tough spot, we got a really tough situation going on with our spouse, with our girlfriend, our boyfriend at school, and like it's been going on for 3 months and it's really getting really bad. And all of a sudden somebody says, hey, I've got the answer, the solution. Like imagine that's what Mitzrayim is. It's the worst thing we could be going through. And boom, somebody shows up ready to take you out of that, to completely make that thing go away. They didn't hear Moses. Why? Mikotzer ruach u'avoda kasha. Kotzer ruach means constriction of breath. Kotzer, shortness, ruach, breath, it means there. Ruach is also related, and the word neshama is related to the word neshima, which is also breath. But because the Jews, and the Rashi says there, that kol mi she'eno yichol laharich b'nishimaso, anybody who does not take long, deep breaths, laharich, orech means long, nishimaso means breath, that's called kotzer ruach. So literally Rashi, the great Jewish commentator, in a pivotal moment where Moses is saying, guys, I am ready to take you out. We're gone. They did not hear him because of constricted breath. Also, interestingly enough, related to breath as well, we see in this week's Parsha, Vayetze Yaackov, the Beersheva, Yaackov left Beersheva, Vayelech Harana, this place called Haran. Now, Haran is where he's going to meet Lavan, Rachel, and Leah. He's going to marry his wives, give birth to the children. But the Kabbalistic Sfarim say, the books say that Haran, the word for anger, the most unholy thing, the Maimoni says, like the only unredeemable trait is anger, is called Haron. The same name, Yaackov went to this place of anger. And the way you say anger in Hebrew is Haron Af, the nose of anger. That's what like anger is called. Haron Af, when the nose, which is where we breathe through, is called Haron Af. Now, interestingly, when we think about God's name, God's called many names, but we know there's 13 attributes of mercy. That the opposite of anger is compassion. And we say that God is Erech Alpayim. He expands his nose, so to speak, his slow to anger and expansive. Erech Alpayim comes from the word af, nose. That Haron af, anger is again a constricted state of I'm wanting to say breath here, but Erech Alpayim, the godly trait of expansive nose or of expansive breath, is this expansiveness is something we need to always bear in mind. So breathing, our breath, and if you speak interesting, and if you learn about acting, almost all acting and setting the moment, getting into the psychology and the tone is all about the breath in that moment. A love scene, a fear scene, a drama, pay attention to the breath. You can look at this as a famous psychology of acting thing. So breath, let's all be aware. Breathing in long, expansive breath, Erech Alpayim, expansive breath, right? Larich b'nishamaso, to expand our breath. That's one very, very clear practice in mindfulness. Two, we mentioned earlier before, is Shabbat. Shabbat is the time for us to stop with the doing. And the unique thing about Jews is that we are doers. You know, I've been to mindfulness conferences with the head of leadership and development at Facebook, and the head of learning and development also at Facebook, and the head of the Goldie Hawn Foundation, and all these tech, people who believe in mindfulness. We took a 3 days at the Fairmont Orchid in the Big Island of Hawaii to have an unconference about mindfulness, right? So these are people who understand a 10-day silent meditation retreat, or understand an ayahuasca journey to a shaman. So we're sitting there on Shabbat talking, and I was the one Hasidic Jew dressed there in my full black, hat, payas out, walking around, and they asked me, and I remember telling, it was Bill McClellan, who was the head of leadership at Facebook, even from the early days with Mark Zuckerberg, really special guy, not Jewish. That he was wondering, like, what is with the Shabbat? It's 1 day a week. You're saying the Shabbat is the divine feminine. It's 1 day, not 6 days. And I explained to him, I said, listen, you guys all understand Shabbat, the need to desist. But let me tell you something very unique about the Jewish people is the 6 days of the week. That 6 days we're meant to hustle. We're not meant to be in I've been to Taoist shrines where all they do is light incense all day and sit and meditate and watch breath and expand breath and sit and still the snow globe of the mind. I've been to those places. Jewish people, 6 days a week, hustle, dance, shoot a jump shot, build a hedge fund, hustle, do your thing, start a podcast, shape and build the world. Our wisdom is embodied. It's not mindfulness sitting on a meditation cushion. It's how much of the Talmud is talking about business, buying, selling, investment, real estate. Yo, let's make it happen. We're here shaping the world. And it was these tech executives who are so into the Eastern traditions, it was really interesting for them to hear, because they had been going to all these contemplative meditation tradition, which was desisting from the world, desisting from food, desisting from everything. But they're trying to run these big businesses, and like, it's a disconnect. But I said, look, 6 days of the week, we hustle. We're not a totally mindful. That's why I told them, I said, we're not a mindful people. We're a hustling people. But 1 day a week, quality over quantity. Sorry for the guys in the room, but we understand that the divine feminine, the seventh, even though in quantity, there's 6 more. And that's really important to build the world. It's the seventh. It's the sof ma'aseh makshava tefillah, the last indeed, first in thought, the divine feminine that we welcome when we say l'chadodi likrat kala, welcome to bring in the bride. That gives us a pivotal transition between the human doing, which is 6 days of suffering, battlefield engagement in the business, in workplace, in school, and wherever. 1 day to just say thank you, to not be the doers and shapers and creators and masculine twisters of the world, which we're supposed to do, but only for the sake of being able to let it all go, to have a womb of existence for its own sake, for its own being, to be beings with no other justification that other than we're being beamed into existence by the will of the creator of the heavens and earth. Every second, every breath is a testament to the will for us to be here. And Shabbat is the time for us to appreciate that. So if we can have that practice on Shabbat, and whether it's related to our digital detox or not, wherever we are on our spectrum, to carve out some time to let the static of the day-to-day lower level souls die down a little bit like the snow globe, and let in a bit of our higher self to recalibrate, this can be a practice that changes our lives, and we can integrate Shabbat into the week. We can have that 1 day of Shabbat during our lunch break, or during our morning meditation, or during our evening stroll. We can bring that notion of contemplative reflection, which is that notion of Shabbat, into our weekday. So with that, it is 10:01 over here in Israel. I'm going to pass it back to Rabbi Hill. There's a lot to discuss here. Maybe just my few points summing up is that mindfulness, yes, there's Jewish mindfulness, but we've got a lot to unpack here. What is mind? What is mindful? What is nis? What is the interaction of the mind and the heart? How is the interaction of the ruach and the heart? What is the interaction of the nephesh and the heart or the mind? How do we understand the present moment and being completely here now versus our understanding of history? Zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, remembering Egypt, remembering that we have soul structures that precede us, remembering all of our history that leads up to now. There's more questions than there are answers. But certainly as a practical step, we can carve out some time to really experience the present moment, let in higher levels of ourselves when we're in an activity, whether it's writing a report or being with our kids or checking our email. Let's really be in it. Let's set the parameters, the higher level will of where we're going to be operating. And if anything else comes into that, if we find ourselves doing something else, know that it's not coming from our true higher self. Know that mindful awareness that another part of ourselves, a lower will, has somehow taken over, thrown a mutiny, and then we can just be mindful, restore where we should be for that moment, and all good things. You guys should be blessed. Thank you. It's wonderful being with you. Thank you, Rabbi Hill.
So let's do a Zoom round of applause for Rabbi Lehman. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Really, thank you so much for joining us. If you've got any questions, I'm going to bring you on if you have any questions in a minute, but just a couple of things first. Just the first few thank yous. First of all, to Yaackov for giving up your valuable time tonight to be with us. So really, really appreciate it. Looking forward to having you on in future times, I hope, please God. And to thank you to our sponsors of the night. We have two very holy women who have sponsored tonight, Hannah Bas Rachel and Sarah Bas Simcha. Hashem should bless you in the merit of the spirituality and Torah we've garnered tonight. Hashem should bless you tremendously in your lives, physically, spiritually. Hashem should help you find your soulmate miyad immediately, and look forward to it. Be invited to your weddings, please God, very, very soon. And if anybody's interested in sponsoring future weeks, please let me know. It's very similar level. I don't know if you know, Yaackov, and the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says that when Jacob had a dream in this week, he says the concept of the dream and the ladder is really the ladder in the dream. Sulam and Chalom is similar letters. It's the connecting, it's the bridging between higher consciousness and lower consciousness. It's the bridging between the physical and the spiritual. So please, and we did a talk on dreams this week, which you haven't listened to yet. Please check out J Network 613, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can hear all about how to interpret your dreams. And please God, how to have very, very sweet dreams tonight. So just before you come up with a couple of questions, just a few thoughts that I've had in my head. Number one, I really genuinely recommend all of you, everybody, because I love to give super practical help for you. Next time you pray, before you just jump into prayer, I really recommend that you just stop before you pray and just like breathe a little bit. Just breathe. You know, Indigo's there with Ben. You're so lucky to be by the Western Wall. Please God, you know, if only I could be by the Western Wall soon. Just before you jump and start praying by the Western Wall, just take a minute to breathe. Take a minute just to clear your mind from the stress and the anxiety and all the WhatsApp messages, and just take some time out, do some very deep breathing, a little bit of meditation, and then you start to pray. Because it's a little bit like if you're speaking to someone on the phone and you're speaking to someone else on the phone and someone else on the phone and someone else on the phone, you haven't got a chance to have a real connection. I really feel one thing we can learn from tonight in Jewish mindfulness is the notion of praying and actually clearing your thoughts beforehand. That's one thought, number one. Number two, as I said, me and Yaackov spent time in Uman with Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman writes that the verse by King David, Hayom B'Kolu Tishmo, the King David writes that you should listen to Hashem's voice today. What do you mean today? There, amazingly, Rabbi Nachman writes the importance of living in the present. You know, the Ibn Ezra writes that our worries are either, what do you worry about, my friends? Now, I'm asking you right now, what are you worrying about? You've either been worried about stuff that happened in the past or stuff that may never happen in the future. If, says Rabbi Nachman, you can just learn to live in the present, right here and now, you've got Dveikus, you've got oneness, there's nothing to worry about. And one thing I think COVID could have taught us, and maybe it's taught some people, including me a little bit, is we can't make plans anyway, because we don't know what on earth will be tomorrow, and that's something we definitely learned in the pandemic. So you might as well live in that present, live in that Hayom. And that's just bringing, maybe connecting what Yaakov's been saying tonight to the Holy Rabbi Nachman. Any questions? I'm happy to, if anyone's got any questions for Yaackov, now is the time. You can put up your hand and I will try and unmute you if I'm able to do that. So we have Camilla. Let's see if I can do this. Asked to unmute. Dun, dun, dun. I think I've asked to unmute, so you should be able to speak now. Go for it, Camilla.
Yeah, thank you. Recently, my boyfriend and we were talking about the Shabbat because he wants to keep more seriously the Shabbat. And he asked me, he's a doctor, okay? And sometimes he has shifts on Saturdays. And he asked me if it's a mitzvah to save lives, especially in COVID situation on Shabbat, or if he should refuse the shifts on Shabbos. That's my question.
So Yaackov, I'm happy to take it. Should I take it? Basically, Camilla, what I'd love to do is really, you've got to know the whole case because every doctor is different, every specialist is different. I'm happy. I'll give you my email is avihill248@gmail.com. Message me and I'd be happy to chat. But in general, yes, of course, to save lives, that's one of the exceptions to resting, because if you're not alive, you can't rest. So first and foremost, we need to live. So generally, absolutely. And I've got friends of mine who are very leading rabbinical scholars, but also doctors. And if need be, at certain points, they will work on Shabbat, but there's a way they do it. So I don't want to give it a blanket, hey, no problem, just go for it, come what may, because actually it depends somewhat on the case. So happy to speak to you later. But good question. Anyone else? Any other questions? Don't be shy. Is anyone raising their hand? Anyone asking? Indigo, awesome. I was about to, let me see if I can find this. Ask to unmute. There you go. You're on.
Yeah, cool. I have a question for Yaackov. So, like living in Israel, like no one's talking about Shemitah, and you were going through like the levels of like high consciousness you can access at the moment. How is Shemitah like raising our abilities for access to the different levels of our soul? Is there any kind of hints to the technology you can give us, and so that we can really make the most of this time this year now?
Let me unmute Yaackov. Here we go. Dun, dun. It's complicated, this.
Indigo rocks, right on. Yeah, so Shemitah is a big one, and
do you want to just explain really what Shemitah is? Yaackov?
Yeah, so the Shemitah is the Shabbat. Once every 7 years, we happen to be in a Shemitah year. It is the sabbatical year. So the land is not worked for an entire year. Anybody can come and harvest the fruits on people's land. It becomes like a public domain, and it's pretty cool. So let's try to go into, so I think Shemitah is definitely related to Jewish consciousness, and even more so the 7 Shemitah cycles, 7 cycles of 7 sabbatical years. You come to a Yovel, which is the Jubilee for the Queen folk over there. I've never been to a Jubilee. I don't know when the last was, but that is what we do every 50 years. And we see very similar 2 things that happen, and we could, ponder the psycho-spiritual meaning of these things, because they're very profound. So as I mentioned, on the Shemitah year, the land becomes ownerless, that anybody can have it. And on the Yovel year, once every 50 years, all land reverts back to its original owner. And even once every 7 years on the Shemitah year, all debts are reverted. So the Torah believes in capitalism. It's like, you're out there, go, hustle, hard work, we reward you, great. But once every 7 years, debts are canceled. Once every 50 years, all property reverts back to its original owner. It's this giant reset that happens in the most physical way, because the Torah recognizes contracts and ownership. These are some of the deepest, most embodied things that we have, and the Torah really takes these things seriously. So much of our Talmud, again, is about these business transactions, about ownership and capital and money, and it's about growth. But just like on Shabbat, it's like a reset. Like the Shemitah or the Yovel is almost like I don't want to say socialist, trigger people in a bad sense, but it's the communal idea of like, hey, we need a big reset here. Things might have gone way out of whack here, and we need to just like system recheck. So that's a big thing. And in the Kabbalah, what happens at that level, especially the level of the Yovel, of the once in every 50, is it's really like the way that things are freed up, things revert back, is like an actual, like I said, reset of the entire earth creation. So when we're blessed to experience that again, I think it's going to be a massive psychological shift. We do have a Shemitah now in Israel. People are talking about that. It's very relevant for where people are buying their fruits and vegetables and how they're working their gardens. There is a thing that debts revert back, but usually when people write contracts, they have an out clause for this. But I do think what we can expect to see as more Jewish people come to Israel, which is really what activates the power of the Shemitah once every 7 years, or the Yovel once every 50 years. Once the majority of Jews are here, then it will activate these things. And I believe we're going to experience like pulsing like spiritual magnetic waves of like resets. And like, whoa, like something comes, a time they blow a shofar on Yovel and all property is reverted. It's a massive shift. And I think that's going to be mirrored by a cognitive spiritual reset too. But I can only conjecture. I haven't been through such a great, wonderful thing as the Jerusalem Jubilee.